In the heart of West Africa, a young leader has risen and captured the attention of an entire continent. His name is Ibrahim Traoré, a man hailed by many as the most loved president in Africa today. But behind the speeches, behind the revolutionary beret, and behind the sudden rise to power, lies a story most people do not know. This video is not just about politics. It's about a journey, a mindset, and a vision that has reshaped Burkina Faso's identity. So today, we will uncover what you don't know about Ibrahim Traoré, the values that shaped him, the leadership decisions that have uplifted millions, and the reasons why he has become a symbol of hope for young Africans across the world. Long before the world knew his name, before the military uniform and the fiery speeches that would echo across Africa, Ibrahim Traoré was simply a boy growing up in the quiet landscapes of Burkina Faso. His childhood was not decorated with privilege. There were no bodyguards, no luxury cars, no political pedigree waiting to be inherited. Instead, he grew up in an environment where every day taught him the meaning of resilience. In his village, life moved slowly, guided by tradition and shaped by the challenges of rural Africa. Children woke up before dawn, chores were done before breakfast, and education was not guaranteed. It was pursued with determination. Traoré belonged to a generation of young Africans who learned early that life does not offer fairness, but it always rewards effort. Those who knew him as a boy recall a quiet, observant child. Unlike many children his age, he did not seek attention. His strength came from patience. While others played, he listened. While others argued, he watched. And while others complained, he looked for solutions. From an early age, he displayed a seriousness that made him stand out, a young mind that understood responsibility long before adulthood. School was an escape for him, a place where discipline, knowledge, and ambition took root. Teachers noticed that he was not the type to dominate the classroom with loudness. He dominated with thoughtfulness. He processed information quickly, asked deep questions, and showed a natural curiosity about how nations function, how societies grow, and why Africa remained trapped in cycles of struggle. These early reflections would later become the core of his political philosophy. As he matured, his worldview expanded. He became increasingly aware of the imbalance that Africa faced. Rich lands, yet poor citizens. Abundant resources, yet little control. This contradiction bothered him deeply. These were not just political theories for him. He had lived the consequences firsthand. He saw families struggle not because they lacked effort, but because systems were designed against them. And it was during these teenage years that a silent fire began to grow within him. After completing his early education, Traoré's academic brilliance led him to the University of Ouagadougou, where he pursued geology. Many people today overlook this part of his journey, but it is one of the most important. Studying geology meant studying Burkina Faso's natural wealth, its minerals, its soil, its economic potential. As he explored the depths of the earth, he also explored the depths of his own beliefs. How can a nation so rich underground remain so poor above it? This question never left him. University life shaped him further, not only intellectually but socially. He became known as a defender of students, a voice for fairness, someone who spoke up when others feared consequences. It was here that his leadership began to emerge more visibly. He was not loud or aggressive, but his words carried weight because they came from conviction. Yet something else called him, something beyond academic ambition. He believed that for a nation to rise, it must first be secure. And so, driven by patriotism and a desire for service, he joined the military. This decision surprised many who knew him academically, but to him it made perfect sense. His country needed defenders. His people needed protection. And leadership, he believed, must begin with sacrifice. In the military, Traoré carried himself with exceptional discipline. He rose through the ranks not because of age or political connections, but because he exemplified what a soldier should be: brave, fair, and committed. He earned respect in the field, in moments where fear destroys weak leadership and forges strong ones. Fellow soldiers describe him as someone who never abandoned his team, someone who stayed calm when situations grew chaotic. These experiences hardened his resolve. They taught him the realities of security, the emptiness of political promises, and the price ordinary people pay when a nation loses control of its destiny. The more he saw, the more he realized that Africa's biggest battles were not only on the front lines, but in the systems that governed its people. By the time Burkina Faso found itself in turmoil, with uncertainty growing and hope fading, many young soldiers saw in him the kind of leadership they had been longing for, leadership rooted in truth, humility, and courage. Not leadership imposed by age or title, but leadership earned through character. This is the real foundation of Ibrahim Traoré. Not a sudden rise, not a quest for fame, but a lifetime of silent preparation, shaped by hardship, molded by service, and driven by a belief that ordinary citizens deserve extraordinary leaders. By the time Ibrahim Traoré entered his early 30s, Burkina Faso was standing on the edge of a storm. The country was caught in a wave of insecurity, political tension, economic stagnation, and a growing sense of hopelessness that had silently spread across villages and cities alike. People were tired of empty promises, tired of leaders who seemed distant, and tired of watching their homeland slowly slip into chaos. In the markets, conversations grew heavier. In households, families whispered the same question: when will things get better? For many, the situation felt like a cycle with no end. Armed groups threatened rural communities, development projects stalled, and the youth, the majority of the country, felt abandoned by leaders who did not understand their struggles. Inside the military barracks, the frustration was even more intense. Soldiers were on the front lines with limited resources, outdated equipment, and often no clear direction. They watched civilians suffer, watched fellow soldiers fall, and watched the nation they had sworn to defend drift toward instability. Morale sank, and the feeling of being let down by leadership grew stronger with each passing month. This was the environment in which Ibrahim Traoré stood out. While many officers discussed the country's problems in private, Traoré spoke openly about change. Not out of rebellion, but out of love for his country. His courage was different. Measured, principled, and rooted in the belief that leadership must serve people, not the other way around. Young soldiers saw in him a mirror of their own frustrations, but also a guide toward a solution. Traoré was not seeking power. He never campaigned. He never rallied for attention. Instead, his rise came from something much more powerful: the trust of the people around him. Word spread that he was a soldier who refused corruption, someone who lived simply, someone who believed in fairness even when it was unpopular. These qualities slowly built a loyalty that politics cannot buy. Then came a critical moment. A moment when the country stood at a crossroads, facing decisions that could determine its future for generations. Many citizens felt that the leadership at the time lacked direction. The youth felt excluded. Soldiers felt neglected. The country needed a new spirit, someone untainted, someone courageous, someone who understood both the suffering of ordinary citizens and the realities of national defense. And so, in a historic turning point, Ibrahim Traoré stepped forward. It was not a moment of celebration, but a moment of necessity. Burkina Faso needed stability. It needed security. It needed a leader who would restore confidence and give people a reason to believe again. And among soldiers, among youth, among rural communities, his name rose, not as a dictator or an opportunist, but as a symbol of renewal. His rise shocked the outside world, especially because of his age. In a continent where leaders often rule into their 70s and 80s, here was a man in his 30s taking on one of the most difficult national transformations in modern Africa. Critics questioned him, but inside Burkina Faso, many saw his youth as strength, a sign that a new generation was finally stepping forward to reclaim the nation's destiny. From the moment he addressed the country for the first time, something changed. His message was clear, firm, and patriotic. He spoke not like a politician but like a son of the soil, someone who understood what Burkinabe families were going through, someone who refused to kneel before foreign influence, someone who believed that sovereignty was not a slogan but a right. The more he spoke, the more people listened. The more he acted, the more people believed. And slowly, hope began to return. Villagers who once feared nightfall felt a renewed sense of protection. Youth who were ready to give up on their future started to dream again. Soldiers who were once uncertain of their mission found new purpose. Traoré did not rise because he wanted to rule. He rose because his nation needed a leader who would walk beside his people, not above them. This was not just a change in leadership, it was the birth of a movement of pride, a movement of sovereignty, a movement of a nation finally standing on its feet again. When Ibrahim Traoré assumed leadership, he inherited a country burdened by years of frustration, a nation rich in potential yet weakened by mismanagement, corruption, and external dependence. Many leaders before him had spoken of change, but their words rarely translated into results. The people of Burkina Faso did not need more speeches. They needed action, transparency, accountability, and above all, a leader who placed the nation's interests above foreign demands. Traoré stepped into this space with a mindset that immediately separated him from the old order. From the very beginning, he understood that true leadership is not just about securing the present. It is about building a foundation for generations to come. He began by confronting one of the most deeply rooted issues in African governance: the culture of corruption. Instead of turning a blind eye or making symbolic gestures, Traoré made it a personal mission to break the cycles that had drained the country's resources for decades. Government offices were restructured, unnecessary privileges were reduced, and officials were reminded that leadership is a duty, not a pathway to wealth. What shocked many was the simplicity of his own lifestyle. In a world where leaders often surround themselves with luxury, Traoré became known for refusing extravagant perks. His modest way of living sent a powerful signal across the entire government. If the president does not indulge in excess, no minister has the right to do so. That alone restored a level of respect and trust that Burkina Faso had not felt in a long time. For the first time in years, the people saw leadership that looked like them, understood them, and lived among them. But governance for Traoré was about more than just morality. It was about reclaiming ownership of land, of resources, of decision-making. For far too long, Burkina Faso's development had relied on foreign influence, foreign aid, and foreign approval. Traoré challenged this dependency head-on. He openly stated that a sovereign nation cannot be free if its economy, its leadership, and its decisions are controlled from outside its borders. This perspective was not easy, and it did not win him favor among powerful international actors. But inside Burkina Faso, it ignited a wave of pride and unity. His policies focused on returning strategic sectors of the economy to the hands of Burkinabe citizens. He pushed for self-reliance, encouraged local industries, and promoted a national identity centered on dignity and self-respect. He spoke honestly about the traps of neocolonial structures and urged his people to break free from the illusion that their future depended on foreign saviors. Under his leadership, the phrase "sovereignty first" became more than a slogan, it became a national belief. He also introduced reforms aimed at restoring discipline within public institutions. Officials were expected to perform. Projects were monitored closely. Results mattered, not connections. The complacency that had long crippled government offices began to fade. People started seeing new roads, revived public services, and a government that responded faster to crises. These changes were not overnight miracles, but they showed a direction, a roadmap that many Burkinabe had been waiting to see for decades. Perhaps the most powerful transformation he brought was psychological. For years, many African nations had been conditioned to believe they were too weak, too small, or too dependent to chart their own destiny. Traoré shattered that narrative. Through his words and actions, he reminded his people that greatness does not come from approval abroad, it comes from belief at home. His confidence became contagious. Young people who once dreamed of leaving the country began to feel a sense of purpose. Communities that felt forgotten began to feel visible again. In every speech he gave, he emphasized unity, the idea that Burkina Faso could only rise if its people stood together. Whether addressing soldiers, farmers, students, or elders, he spoke with the conviction of someone who had lived every struggle he mentioned. And because he meant what he said, the nation listened. Under Traoré's leadership, good governance was not presented as a political project, but as a cultural rebirth. It was about restoring honesty in leadership, discipline in institutions, pride in identity, and confidence in the future. His message was clear. A country that governs itself with integrity becomes powerful, no matter its size. And so, as Burkina Faso moved from uncertainty to renewed hope, one truth became undeniable. The fight for sovereignty, dignity, and good governance had found a champion who refused to bow, refused to compromise, and refused to repeat the mistakes of the past. When Ibrahim Traoré took the reins of leadership, he inherited a country whose economic lifelines were stretched thin. Burkina Faso, like many African nations, had spent years exporting raw materials while importing finished goods at high prices. Its richest resources brought the least benefit to its own citizens. Entire industries were dominated by foreign interests, and for decades the people had been told that this was simply the way the world worked. But Traoré rejected that narrative from the very beginning. To him, true independence, true freedom, meant controlling the economic future of the nation. It meant that Burkinabe citizens should no longer be spectators watching their own wealth leave the country. He believed that prosperity must begin at home, driven by local hands, local ideas, and local industries. This vision became the heartbeat of his economic transformation. His first step was to confront the long-standing dependency that held the country back. Instead of relying solely on foreign aid, he encouraged a culture of production. He reminded the nation that Africa is not poor, Africa is simply mismanaged, misled, and underutilized. Under his leadership, conversations shifted from, "What can we receive?" to, "What can we create?" This mental shift alone set Burkina Faso on a new economic path. Traoré emphasized value addition, the idea that Burkina Faso should not export raw gold, raw cotton, or raw minerals only to import them again in expensive refined forms. He envisioned a country where factories operate on Burkinabe soil, where products are manufactured locally, where young people find employment not in desperation but in industries that contribute to national growth. He understood that when a nation processes its own resources, it multiplies its wealth and strengthens its independence. One of his most powerful moves was supporting local enterprises and encouraging youth entrepreneurship. For too long, many young Burkinabe believed that their only path to success was leaving the country. Traoré sought to reverse this painful trend. Through empowerment programs, incentives, and public messaging, he called upon young people to become inventors, builders, farmers, engineers, and entrepreneurs. He reminded them that the future of Burkina Faso would be shaped not by outsiders, but by the hands of its own people. Agriculture, the backbone of the Burkinabe economy, also received renewed attention. Traoré pushed for modernization, improved irrigation, better access to farming tools, and a system where farmers earned fair value for their labor. He believed that no nation could rise if its farmers remained poor. And so, he worked to elevate the agricultural sector from basic survival to a true economic engine capable of feeding the nation and supplying regional markets. Another remarkable part of his economic mission was reclaiming national wealth from foreign dominance. Traoré took bold steps to renegotiate and rethink agreements that favored external companies while leaving Burkinabe citizens with crumbs. He challenged unfair contracts, fought against exploitation, and demanded transparency in how national resources were managed. This was not an easy path. It attracted criticism. It stirred discomfort among those who had benefited from the old system. But for the masses, it was a breath of fresh air, a sign that for once, their wealth was being guarded. He also promoted regional cooperation with like-minded African nations who shared the same vision of sovereignty. Instead of isolating Burkina Faso, he sought stronger ties with neighbors who wanted to break away from economic dependency. Together, these alliances formed a new shared identity, one that insisted Africa could stand tall on its own terms. Through all these efforts, one theme remained constant. Burkina Faso must grow from within. Traoré believed that a country's greatest resource is its people. And when people are empowered, respected, and given the tools to work, they can build a nation stronger than any foreign aid package ever could. Slowly, this economic philosophy began to change the atmosphere in Burkina Faso. Small industries started emerging. Youth became more confident in starting businesses. Farmers felt seen, valued, and supported. Citizens who once felt invisible in the nation's economic conversations began to recognize their role in shaping the country's destiny. Traoré's economic vision was never about short-term gains. It was about creating a foundation that future generations would inherit with pride. A foundation built on ownership, dignity, and the belief that a nation's wealth must feed its own children first before benefiting the world. This is the economic legacy he began to craft. A legacy that tells every Burkinabe child that they are not destined to struggle, but destined to build. Long before Ibrahim Traoré ever spoke about reform or sovereignty, he understood one truth that every Burkinabe citizen lived with daily. A nation cannot develop without security. Roads cannot be built if communities are unsafe. Schools cannot function if parents fear sending their children outside. Farms cannot thrive when farmers must abandon their land due to threats. For years, people had lived under a shadow of insecurity. Attacks on villages, displacement, fear spreading through once peaceful regions. And although the nation's spirit remained strong, the constant instability weighed heavily on the population. When Traoré stepped into leadership, he made one promise that would define his mission. Burkina Faso will not live in fear. To him, security was not just a military operation, it was a duty, a commitment, a moral responsibility. He believed that protecting the people was the first and most sacred role of any leader. From the first days of his leadership, he moved swiftly. He strengthened the military, not through slogans, but through real action. He ensured soldiers had better equipment, improved training, and proper support. He understood their struggles firsthand because he had stood beside them on the front lines. He knew what it meant to face danger with inadequate resources. So he changed that. He gave the army something they had been missing for a long time. Leadership that listened to them, leadership that respected them, leadership that trusted them. Traoré also emphasized unity within the security forces. Instead of distancing himself as a commander, he brought soldiers closer. He visited forward bases, talked to fighters directly, shared meals with them, and stood among them not as a distant president but as a fellow soldier. These moments rebuilt morale. Soldiers began to feel valued again. They felt they had a leader who truly understood their sacrifices, a leader who would not abandon them. But beyond the military, he introduced a powerful idea that reshaped the nation's defense: the involvement of citizens in securing their own communities. For too long, insecurity had made people feel helpless, waiting for rescue. Traoré believed that the resilience of a nation lies in its people, and he encouraged community defense groups and volunteers to play a role in protecting their homes. He gave the population a sense of empowerment, reminding them that they were not victims, they were guardians of their land. This approach sparked a new spirit. Villages that had once been vulnerable began to feel protected again. Communities that had been forced to flee their homes started returning with cautious hope. And every time Traoré spoke to the people, he reassured them that no part of Burkina Faso would be abandoned. Whether north, south, east, or west, every community was important. Every life mattered. But his philosophy on security was broader than weapons and military strategies. Traoré understood the deeper root causes: poverty, unemployment, lack of opportunity, and the despair that drives people to vulnerability. So he linked security with development. He declared that schools must reopen, farms must be restored, and local economies must be revived. Because safety is not only about guns. It is about stability, dignity, and giving citizens reasons to stay hopeful. This holistic approach marked a turning point. Slowly, stories of resilience began to replace stories of fear. Reports of villages rebuilding, markets reopening, and communities standing strong together became more common. The nation began to breathe again. Hope, once fragile, started to grow. Of course, the journey was not without challenges. The threats were real, the struggles were intense, and the enemy was ruthless. But Traoré's message remained unwavering. Burkina Faso will not bow. Burkina Faso will not surrender its land. Burkina Faso will rise above its challenges. He reminded both the nation and the world that security is not just about territory. It is about dignity. It is about ensuring that no Burkinabe child grows up believing their homeland is dangerous or hopeless. It is about restoring confidence, restoring pride, and restoring the belief that the future can be brighter than the past. Under his leadership, security became not just a national priority, but a shared mission. A mission that united soldiers, civilians, youth, elders, and entire communities. It became a symbol of national strength and national courage. And through it all, one thing became clear. Ibrahim Traoré did not simply promise to protect his people. He lived that promise every single day. As Ibrahim Traoré's leadership gained admiration across Africa and beyond, many people saw the rise of a young, bold, and decisive leader. But behind the public praise lay a story of heavy responsibility, one often overlooked by those who only see the headlines. In this section, we take you deep into the pressure, risks, and sacrifices that come with leading a nation like Burkina Faso during its most difficult chapter. From the moment he stepped into power, Traoré inherited a country battered by years of economic strain, internal instability, and humanitarian difficulties. What most people never see is how every decision he made came with enormous consequences. His push to reestablish security meant confronting groups that had taken advantage of past political uncertainty. This wasn't a symbolic effort. It demanded long hours of consultations, reorganizing the defense structure, holding commanders accountable, and personally visiting troubled regions to show solidarity with the citizens. People often admire his courage, but they don't see the hidden toll it takes. Traoré's insistence on staying close to the ground meant long trips through dangerous areas, nights spent in military camps, and conversations with displaced families whose hopes rested entirely on him. Every promise he made in those villages became a responsibility that weighed on him daily. He wasn't just a leader. He became a symbol of hope, and that is a burden few can carry with ease. But perhaps the biggest challenge was balancing rising expectations. The youth saw him as their champion, the rural communities saw him as their protector, and Africa saw him as the face of a new generation of leadership. With so many eyes fixed on him, every small misstep could easily be magnified. Traoré had to learn quickly how to manage national expectations while pushing forward with reforms that would take time to bear fruit. Some policies demanded patience. Others demanded immediate results. And striking that balance was a constant tightrope walk. At the same time, Traoré faced the difficult task of restoring trust in institutions, in leadership, and in the future. After years of instability, many citizens were skeptical of government promises. Winning back that trust required transparency, courage, and sometimes unpopular decisions. He had to improve accountability, restructure outdated systems, and confront corruption where it existed. These steps created both supporters and critics, but they were necessary to rebuild the nation on solid ground. One of the most overlooked sacrifices was his personal life. Becoming the face of a nation at such a young age meant giving up privacy, comfort, and even security. Most people see a confident leader delivering speeches, but they never see the long nights of briefings or the difficult intelligence reports he had to go through. Reports of attacks prevented, attacks feared, threats intercepted, and families affected. Leadership became a daily battle of responsibility over rest. And still, despite all these pressures, Traoré remained connected to ordinary people. He would walk among civilians, speak with market traders, sit with farmers, and listen to their concerns directly. These interactions shaped many of his priorities, especially his focus on local empowerment. But even these moments came with risk, as high-profile leaders are always targets. Yet he chose to be present, not distant, believing that real leadership grows from the ground, not from behind closed doors. Traoré's journey has been shaped not only by the victories people celebrate, but also by the battles no one sees, the silent struggles, the difficult decisions, and the weight of guiding a nation toward hope during one of its hardest moments. And it is this combination of resilience, sacrifice, and determination that continues to define his story. Beyond governance, security, and national reforms, Ibrahim Traoré's influence has become deeply cultural, something that resonates emotionally across Africa. His leadership awakened a sense of pride, possibility, and renewed identity among young Africans, especially those who for years felt disconnected from politics or disillusioned with leadership. In this section, we focus on how Traoré became more than a president. He became a symbol of African strength, unity, and self-belief. From the beginning, one of the most powerful aspects of Traoré's rise was what it meant for young people. In a continent where many leaders are significantly older, Traoré represented a new generation. Someone who understood the frustrations of unemployment, the desire for dignity, and the hunger for real change. When he spoke about sovereignty, self-reliance, and reclaiming national dignity, millions of young Africans connected with him not because of his title, but because he spoke the language of their daily struggles. His leadership style, direct, unpretentious, close to the ground, offered a blueprint for how young Africans believe leadership should look. He didn't come across as distant or unreachable. Whether wearing simple fatigues, walking among civilians, or standing alongside soldiers in the field, Traoré projected an image that leadership is not about prestige, but about service. That alone shifted the mindset of many youths who had long believed that politics was out of their reach. Traoré also influenced cultural expression across the continent. Artists, musicians, and storytellers began creating work inspired by his message of resilience and sovereignty. His speeches turned into music samples, his quotes spread through social media, and his image appeared in murals across cities in West Africa. For many, he wasn't just a political figure. He became a cultural icon whose story echoed the legacy of Africa's historic revolutionaries. In Burkina Faso itself, this cultural shift was even more visible. Young people became more engaged in community development, local defense initiatives, and small-scale entrepreneurship. Universities saw rising discussions about African history, leadership, and nation-building. People openly celebrated their traditions, languages, and identity with greater pride. Traoré's call for unity and self-determination reminded many that development does not always mean imitating the outside world. It can also mean embracing and elevating one's own heritage. This revival of cultural confidence wasn't only symbolic, it had practical effects. Local industries experienced renewed support as people pushed to buy domestic products. Young innovators began creating solutions for challenges in agriculture, transport, and technology. Even social attitudes began to shift. Instead of waiting for external assistance, many communities started looking inward, asking themselves what they could build with their own hands. Traoré's stance on sovereignty also sparked continental discussions about what it means for African nations to control their resources, shape their own policies, and define their path without excessive dependence on outside actors. These conversations spread far beyond Burkina Faso. Young people in Kenya, Uganda, Nigeria, Ghana, and many others began referencing his leadership as an example of African courage and self-respect. Interestingly, Traoré's influence wasn't built through grand speeches or elaborate political campaigns. Instead, it grew from his simplicity, the humility in his tone, the seriousness in his delivery, and the way he carried himself created an authenticity that modern audiences crave. In an age of filtered images and political scripting, he appeared raw and real. That authenticity connected deeply with a generation that values honesty more than perfection. And this cultural impact may be one of the most enduring aspects of his leadership. Political reforms can be changed, and policies can be revised. But when a leader reshapes the mindset of an entire generation, when he awakens a sense of inner pride and possibility, that influence can last for decades. Traoré's story is still being written, but one thing is already clear. His presence on the African stage has become a cultural turning point, a reminder that leadership can look different, that youth can rise, and that Africa's identity can be reclaimed with confidence, purpose, and unity. One of the most profound parts of Ibrahim Traoré's leadership is something that doesn't always make headlines but is felt deeply by the people: the return of national confidence. Long before buildings are rebuilt, long before policies take effect, and long before the results of reforms can be measured, there is something more important that must be restored: hope. And in Burkina Faso, hope had been fading for years. When Traoré stepped into leadership, many citizens felt a sense of fatigue. Years of tension, instability, and uncertainty had drained the spirit of the nation. People felt like the future was slipping out of reach, and there was a growing fear that the challenges facing the country were too overwhelming to fix. For many families, Worry had become a normal part of life. But gradually something changed. And that shift wasn't born from promises or speeches. It came from presence, action, and a renewed connection between leadership and the people. Traoré began showing up in places where leaders rarely go. He walked through rural communities, visited areas affected by insecurity, and held conversations with people whose voices were often ignored. In those interactions, citizens began to feel seen again, truly seen. They began to believe that their struggles mattered, that someone in leadership understood the weight they carried every day. This emotional reconnection between leader and nation was the seed of renewed confidence. For the first time in a long while, many Burkinabe felt a sense of direction. They started seeing efforts to empower local communities, support local production, and strengthen national resilience. Even if challenges remained, they could feel that momentum had shifted. It is often said that hope grows when people begin to feel movement, and in Burkina Faso, that sense of movement was unmistakable. But restoring confidence also meant confronting harsh truths. Traoré knew that rebuilding trust had to start with transparency. So instead of avoiding difficult conversations, he opened them. He spoke honestly about challenges, about what could be achieved quickly and what would take time. That honesty itself built credibility. People don't expect miracles. They expect sincerity, and Traoré's straightforward communication style resonated deeply. Another aspect of renewing national hope was reviving the spirit of unity. Burkina Faso is a nation of diverse cultures, beliefs, and communities. Over time, hardship had created divisions between regions, between urban and rural populations, between those directly affected by conflict and those watching from a distance. Traoré emphasized the importance of national cohesion, reminding citizens that the country would only rise if everyone rose together. Community initiatives, youth mobilization, and local development programs began strengthening the relationship between citizens and the state. And gradually, the idea of Burkina Faso first, a commitment to collective progress, became a powerful force. People started believing not only in their leader but also in themselves and in each other. Hope also grew from the small victories, things outsiders might overlook but that meant everything to those on the ground. Roads repaired, schools reopened, markets revived. Communities that had once been silent at night began hearing laughter again. These weren't just improvements. They were signs of life returning, signs that people were reclaiming their daily routines and their sense of normalcy. And perhaps the most inspiring part was how the youth responded. Young people began speaking proudly about their country again. Many started volunteering, creating small businesses, and participating in local problem-solving efforts. The belief that Burkina Faso can rise turned into a mindset that spread from one community to another. In many ways, Traoré's leadership helped transform fear into determination, doubt into purpose, and uncertainty into optimism. He reminded the nation that rebuilding is not an overnight process. It's a journey that requires courage, discipline, and unity. And as long as the people walk that journey together, progress becomes possible. By rekindling national pride and restoring the spirit of hope, Ibrahim Traoré helped Burkina Faso stand with a stronger backbone, a clearer vision, and a renewed belief that the future could be shaped, not by circumstances, but by collective will. Ibrahim Traoré's leadership has not only transformed Burkina Faso internally, but it has also started reshaping how the country is viewed across the continent and the world. For decades, Burkina Faso had been largely overlooked on the international stage, often mentioned only in the context of crises, insecurity, or economic challenges. But under Traoré, the narrative began to shift. Slowly, deliberately, Burkina Faso started to be seen as a nation capable of resilience, innovation, and self-determination. What set Traoré apart internationally was not flamboyant diplomacy or showy state visits. It was authentic leadership rooted in results. Global observers noticed a leader who prioritized his people first, who made difficult decisions with courage, and who consistently emphasized sovereignty and self-reliance. In a world where African nations are too often pressured to follow external agendas, Traoré's firm stance on independence drew attention and respect. Africa, in particular, began to see him as part of a new generation of leaders who were willing to challenge old patterns. While some older governments clung to outdated models of governance, Traoré embraced a fresh vision, one that combined strong security, economic self-reliance, youth empowerment, and national dignity. His approach reminded many in Africa that leadership is not just about longevity or influence. It is about effectiveness, integrity, and moral courage. International recognition did not come easily. Traoré faced scrutiny and skepticism from various global institutions accustomed to dealing with leaders who maintained the status quo. But his consistency and transparency gradually built credibility. Diplomats, analysts, and observers began referencing Burkina Faso as an example of a country redefining its path despite external pressures. This recognition was not just symbolic. It strengthened the country's bargaining position in trade, security cooperation, and regional partnerships. Even more importantly, Traoré's leadership inspired other African nations to reflect on their own governance and policies. Young leaders and activists saw that change was possible, even in nations with significant challenges. His emphasis on local empowerment, transparency, and citizen-focused governance became a model discussed across African forums, social media, and conferences. In essence, Traoré began influencing a continent far beyond Burkina Faso's borders, not through rhetoric, but through demonstrated action. At home, this international acknowledgement reinforced the confidence of the Burkinabe people. Seeing their country recognized for courage, resilience, and innovative governance helped strengthen national pride. Citizens began to feel that their struggles and sacrifices were not invisible, but valued and respected on a global scale. They began to understand that Burkina Faso was not merely surviving adversity, it was beginning to set an example for others. Traoré's influence, however, goes beyond mere recognition. It is rooted in the way he has aligned national priorities with the aspirations of his people. Security, sovereignty, and development are not abstract goals. They are tangible outcomes that the nation and its neighbors can observe. This clarity of purpose has helped place Burkina Faso in a new light, a country that, despite challenges, is asserting its independence and charting a path defined by its own people. In short, Ibrahim Traoré has made Burkina Faso not only a nation of renewed internal hope, but also a symbol across Africa. A reminder that leadership is measured not by titles, longevity, or alliances, but by vision, courage, and the ability to inspire real transformation. As we reach the closing chapter of this story, it becomes clear that Ibrahim Traoré's journey is far from ordinary. His leadership is not defined solely by policies or speeches, but by the lasting impact he has had on the people of Burkina Faso and the inspiration he provides across Africa. In a short span of time, he has reshaped governance, strengthened security, revived the economy, empowered youth, and restored hope, leaving a legacy that will endure long after today. The true mark of a leader, Traoré has shown, is not in seeking admiration, but in creating conditions for others to thrive. Under his guidance, ordinary citizens have begun to feel extraordinary again. Farmers, students, entrepreneurs, and soldiers, all of them, have found renewed purpose, pride, and confidence in their nation. Communities once plagued by fear now embrace a future that feels possible and promising. This is the power of leadership rooted in authenticity, courage, and unwavering commitment to the people. Even as challenges remain, the trajectory of Burkina Faso has shifted. Traoré's vision is clear. A country that is self-reliant, secure, and united, where citizens are empowered to shape their own destiny, and where sovereignty is not a slogan, but a lived reality. His dedication reminds the world that even in the face of adversity, meaningful transformation is possible when leadership is guided by integrity, empathy, and vision. Perhaps the most enduring part of Traoré's legacy is the hope he has ignited among young Africans. His leadership has sparked a new belief that youth can lead, that the next generation can rise above the mistakes of the past, and that a nation's future is determined by those who dare to act, to innovate, and to stay true to their values. Across Burkina Faso and beyond, his example encourages young leaders to step forward, speak boldly, and build the Africa they envision. As Burkina Faso moves into the future, Traoré's story will continue to unfold. His legacy is not just the reforms implemented, the security restored, or the economy revitalized. It is the spirit he has awakened. The spirit of a people who now believe that they can reclaim their destiny, stand tall, and shape the course of their own nation. And that, perhaps, is the greatest achievement any leader can hope to leave behind. In telling the story of Ibrahim Traoré, we witness more than just a presidency. We witness a movement, a renewed hope, and the power of principled, courageous leadership. It is a story that reminds us all that greatness is not about age, wealth, or titles. It is about vision, action, and the relentless pursuit of what is right for your people. Burkina Faso may still face challenges, but with leaders like Ibrahim Traoré, the nation has rediscovered its voice, its pride, and its confidence. And the world watches as a new chapter in African leadership is being written, one that is defined not by external influence, but by the courage and determination of its own citizens. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the incredible story of Ibrahim Traoré, a leader who has inspired a nation and left a mark across Africa. If you've enjoyed this deep dive into his leadership, vision, and the transformation he's bringing to Burkina Faso, make sure you hit that like button to show your support. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss more videos exploring inspiring leaders, untold stories, and remarkable moments shaping Africa today. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and tell us what you found most inspiring about Ibrahim Traoré's journey. And if you think others should see this story, make sure to share this video with your friends and family. Remember, knowledge is power, and understanding the stories behind leaders like Traoré helps us see the true spirit of Africa. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.